Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about Composio. Composio recently raised money from Lightspeed earlier this year, and we're going to go through what they do, what their future likely looks like, and the landscape of MCP servers and tools in general.
MCP is on everyone's mind, but Composio is not just an MCP provider. They're more of a general provider for tools for your agents. I think of them as like Twilio for AI in some sense for your agents. Communication layer that talks to MCP servers, tools that are not MCP servers, does auth for you, really tries to handle all that somewhat complicated part that comes up when you start to build an agent. I will note they don't host the agents, yet at least, but they handle everything else around them.
Going through the investment memo, they really highlight evolving and learning infrastructure, and we'll talk about where we think that will exist. They really highlight skills that evolve. They highlight that they have over 10,000 tools, and they use the language of tools as opposed to just integrations. So they want to make it very clear it's for agents.
As a former Alexa guy, I think skills is always something that gives me a little PTSD. Yeah. You can have a lot of skills that don't work that well, but I do think it's a good concept.
Sounds like the value prop is it takes hours to set up agents to have appropriate tool calls. They want to reduce that by making sure you set up auth ahead of time and that tool calling works as expected.
So within Composio, we're talking about skills, we're talking about communication pipes. Really what it comes down to is that they offer these toolkits and these tools in general that you can write Python code or TypeScript code to access. To me, that's really important. They're dev first over no code. That dev first aspect is something that I think differentiates them quite a bit from some of the other providers in this space. We're seeing a lot of companies that are doing no code integrations with all these different tools and events. And it's kind of nice just to be able to write a little Python to get your agent going, because that's what you're going to be doing anyway if you're writing an agent.
The setup was pretty simple. I really liked their getting started experience. I think their language is interesting. Instead of calling things tools, integrations, they call them toolkits. So you set up a toolkit for Gmail, and then within that, you'll actually create an auth config, which will highlight how your users actually log in and actually use the tools. And within each toolkit, you can see all the tools that are available. And because these are called toolkits, it's clear that this is separate from MCPs because you can go ahead and config MCPs themselves. So it'll have access to all of this when building it.
It's a bit of that layer atop using any of these MCP servers. I'll also call out that they don't just offer tools that give your agent access to something. They also offer the other direction, event integrations, where you might register for an event, like something coming back from GitHub, email coming in maybe from Gmail, anything like that. And you can provide a webhook that will call your agent when that event comes through. That's something that as people building agents, we run into all the time. We don't want our agents to be purely something that a human has to trigger. Sometimes you want them to run in the background. Many times you want them to run in the background. And I'll posit that long run, most agents will be run in the background, triggered by some sort of event, which could just be wake up every day and do something. It could be do something whenever my PR comes through, or whenever you see this particular news article. So this is really something that I expect many agent companies to be doing in the future. Yeah, so Composio, as I said, is very dev first. They actually really came to focus, for me at least, when they got like 25K plus stars on GitHub, which is pretty impressive for a company that's been around only for a few years. 2023, I think they were started. And that's really something that you can see developers are starting to like them. And they see enough value that they're not just starring, they actually are using it. They are using different tools that are coming through. I do think the ease of use of trying to define these tools in Python is nice. One of the issues that I've run into writing agents myself is that sometimes you've got like 100 tools, 50 tools, let's say, even 40 tools you want to use. It's actually kind of hard to use because we all know that LLMs today can't really handle more than 20, 30 tools. So Composio adds that little bit of layer to do routing, to let you define, maybe I want to bring in this toolkit with only these 3 tools enabled, not all 20 that might come with the MCP server normally. That kind of filtering seems small, but it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. I think one part that's a little confusing is when to use Composio versus your own MCP tools.
Yeah.
I agree. Like one pattern that we've seen become popular is you may even have like a librarian tool, which actually will decide, okay, because I hit the limit of 20 to 30, or being good at tool calls at 20, 30 tools, maybe I'll have a Composio or potentially a librarian tool that tells me, okay, for this subset of tools, potentially productivity tools, it'll go ahead and decide what to pull from versus putting every single item into the tool call list.
Whereas, and Composio tends to do that for you. They have their own, I think they call it smart routing or something, that decides what tools to use if you give a bunch of these things.
Yeah. I do think a little bit of like history, the Composio came to the scene because it was really hard to manage all these tools, and I think it became very popular when that was the case. Now that MCP has become popular, I do wonder what the value prop is. Is it just having all the auth config in one place, helping with that routing? That is something I'm thinking about as far as the value prop of Composio.
I think that is one of the biggest risks in general, is that you can see that Anthropic and others are playing in this space and doing a lot more direct work in figuring out how to offer those MCP tools for you to just pick up easily without having to go through another layer.
Yeah.
We'll see though.
I went through sort of the getting started guide and I tried setting up effectively an agent that worked with Gmail and Slack. I will say I tried setting up the Slack bot and I noticed, there is a setup process. I tried to click more and their docs didn't quite work. I can tell that some of the links in the app itself point to composio.dev/docs, but their docs now are hosted on docs.composio. So if anyone there is watching, we may want to update those links. I did find through some older documentation, what I think was their original strategy was actually trying to host MCP servers. So I found mcp.composio.dev. I can see their older logo. I do think at some point they just tried to decide, hey, can we host the MCP servers ourselves instead of just doing all the integrations? But now it does look like they're all in on rube.app. Rube.app or Rube, the MCP server, is really a layer on top of their own integrations and other MCP tools that you give access to.
It's turtles all the way down. I do think Rube, I assume they named it after Rube Goldberg. If they did, though, it's kind of a funny one to pick. Rube Goldberg kind of created crazy, impractical machines. Hopefully this one is relatively practical when you're using these apps. But I do think it makes sense for how people are starting to use Claude today and any of the OpenAI kind of ChatGPT tools today. The fact that you can just go and register for an MCP server, and that MCP server now gives you direct access across the board to any of these tools that you've defined to have on top of this new Rube layer, should be nice for people who interact that way. I'm still more of a background agents guy myself, but I can see the use case here.
One value I can see of Composio and Rube is the auth config is done ahead of time, and as an org, you can set that up fully throughout the organization. Rube will only have access to the right things. Claude and by Anthropic, they do let you just set up your own MCP servers. Or I guess one thing I'm thinking about is when to use one or the other.
Right now, I could see someone using Rube because they have 10 to 20 different servers they want to access, and they'd rather just do that once, right? Because every single time you go and add a new server, you have to go through and like set it up and do everything like that. So that part's nice. I also do think this is kind of touching on future roadmap stuff that we should talk about. If they bring some of the promise of learning and improving for you, then I can see this being an intelligent layer, not just a layer that's pure integrations. But besides that, I do think Rube, a lot of it's going to come down to how painful is it to set up a bunch of servers, and maybe that'll get less painful over time as everyone gets better at doing it. Or more likely, we'll just have many, many, many different tools and servers and connections that people want to use, and simplifying with a single kind of portal or integration is useful.
Speaking of Rube's and Composio sort of value prop in future around learning and evolving, I have a guess, which is, when you do the get tools in Composio, you can see their descriptions for the tools themselves. In the documentation, they do say, hey, after learning about edge cases, we'll update the tools to better be called across all your agents. One way they could do that is be updating those descriptions, giving good examples within them, so the tool calls are better when the agents call them. But it's unclear. I'm curious if you have any other models in mind of what evolving and learning tool calls looks like.
Yeah, the one-shot stuff you mentioned could be there. I also do see the promise of the fact that they are hosting a variety of tools and servers. They're also seeing every single interaction that comes through. They're kind of an observability layer on the tool side of things. That gives you enough data, ideally, to be able to maybe do some reinforcement learning across your router, for example, at least to start, or across some of the tools that you own, because sometimes you will have a model that's just inside of each of those tools as well to decide how to do certain calls.
Yeah.
That'll be very valuable. I do think the piece they're missing is actually hosting agents. Realistically, I think to build truly intelligent agents that learn over time, I think you have to have hosting too. So this is a start, but I would bet good money that they're going to either get into hosting or offering some fine-tuned models for you. You can imagine models that were trained on a bunch of tool calls, fine-tuned on a bunch of tool calls, maybe some LoRa's that are just for a particular enterprise customer. Yeah. There's a variety of approaches here. I think they're setting up the right infrastructure, and I'm very excited to see where they go with it.
I am surprised that the value prop of learning tool calls and evolving skills is so high on their landing page and in their marketing. And maybe this is in the enterprise and not available for the free version, but it wasn't obvious to me in the docs or through the getting started how that actually worked.
Yeah, how do you actually give feedback? How does it learn automatically? Because there are some things that when we build agents within the company or for our own use cases, sometimes you just want to be able to mark something more manually and say that didn't work or this did work. There's no option like that here. There's no way to give your own task-specific evaluation. Those are all very important if we're talking about production level agents. You're not just going to be able to glean that information, not to mention another competitor, from the data that you're seeing that passes through it.
They highlight them as a customer, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Right here.
Pricing is a little confusing. I think that it's a little hard when you have two products that work atop each other. I went to look at the Rube pricing, and I saw, this works a certain way if you're running managed Composio. Okay, how much does managed Composio cost? And it's really not clear to me what I would end up spending if I was a customer picking this up, if I want to use both Rube and Composio together, because it seems like they need to match together. I think that's something that, enterprise pricing is never easy. The real answer to this is probably it doesn't matter if you're a company using it a bunch, you'll negotiate your own contract with them. Yeah. But as a small-time user checking it out, it was a little hard for me to figure it out.
Yeah, and maybe stacking pricing is how you deal with negative net margins and you just get profits somewhere else. But I agree, it is a little confusing that Rube, the MCP server, has its own sort of SaaS-based pricing, while managed Composio has, again, some SaaS-based, but with limits with additional call pricing. I'm curious how they're going to go to market with one versus the other, and maybe both. Anything else you want to highlight?
No, really cool product, and I'm excited to see where the learning part comes in.
Yeah, let's see if we're right. Alrighty, talk to y'all soon. Bye, everyone.